All right. Okay, so we have 30 minutes remaining. So let's take a quick peek at the next file. All right. There's not too much here, so I think we might be able to squeeze this in. But the idea here is that we want to use distance and a grid of objects that are static in their position. We're going to use distance to then change their size, right? So we have this kind of pixelized grid of circles that change their scale relative to the position of the mouse, right? So let's bounce back over to the presentation. Let's talk about what we need, what kind of concepts we need to be able to do this, right? So we said this is going to be distance-based behavior. So we're going to create a grid of scaling circles or ellipses, right? So what we're going to do is review the fact that the display window has a coordinate system, right? So essentially we have a space in which to work with. So we can define properties of anything inside the display window relative to their distance to something else or proximity to, let's say, the mouse as an input, right? So in combination with the distance-based behavior, we also need to look at how we can use nested loops, right? So one loop or one dimension of actions, right? We can create a row of objects, or in the case of the trailing ellipses, a kind of snaking row of objects. But if we nest loops, we can compound the actions that are defined within, and thereby create something like a grid. So instead of just one loop, we can have a second loop that's nested inside, so that the action happens not once for every condition inside the first loop, but also within here, right? So we can then create, it's very easy to then create a grid or a matrix of elements. Okay, so let's see if we can't execute this last file in the time remaining, and we'll save the rest of the additional files that you have for reference for next week's webinar. All right, so I'm going to do a new file. And again, this is based off the file that's labeled 05 distance-based behavior. All right, and the idea here is that we want to draw a grid of scaling circles. And we're going to use the mouse position, right, to determine size or to define size. All right, great. So we need some global variables. The first is a radius value for the size of our circles. So we're going to define a radius, right? And then we'll go ahead and do our setup and our draw, right? And inside of setup, we're going to have to define size, background, etc. And then here in draw, this is where we're going to start to use our nested loop, right? And as we did before, in order to see the change frame to frame, we want to refresh the background of the display window. All right, so we're not drawing over the previous frame, but we're refreshing it and drawing anew. All right, so then we're going to set up two loops, right? We're going to set up a loop to step through the x direction of our grid, and then another one to step through the y direction, right? And in each step within the inner loop, we're going to declare and define the size of our circle, which would be at the current position within the grid, and then we're going to draw it. All right, remember that here we're actually using the ellipse command.